So we're obviously in a world where our businesses want predictability. Okay, so however, you could argue that the number one way to not shoot yourself in the foot with estimating is to not do it at all. But unfortunately, you're going to mostly be required to provide some kind of estimate unless you're in a very kind of sort of idyllic situation. Business wants to know what they're going to get and when. Okay, they also want to know that you're in control, that you have a plan in what you're doing. So that's also actually a common reason why businesses ask us, when are things going to be done? They just want to know that we sort of know what we're doing and have a bit of a plan. They want to know that they're getting bang for their buck. So the amount of money they're spending, they want to get confidence that they're actually going to get a bang for their buck. So they want predictability, they want bang for buck, but they also want to be responsive to change, because the world's changing, the market's changing. They also want to be really fast at delivering stuff as well, and they want high quality. So we've got to kind of do all of those things, and that makes it really, really difficult. And this is why estimation is a very, very popular problem to discuss. So I guess the reason that they want all of these things is why we're now sort of all doing agile, right? We're all working in agile fashion so that we can try and do things quicker and deliver value quicker and be responsive, but also be predictable as well. So we've got to somehow marry the need for predictability and sort of upfront estimation with agility and this new paradigm that we're in of being agile, which makes it very tricky. Now, I would argue that we certainly have far more potential to shoot ourselves in the foot with estimation now than we sort of did in traditional software lifecycle. Because in the traditional software lifecycle, we built a plan up front, and then we sort of made sure that we kept changes to a minimum. We generally had plenty of time for correcting our course if we were off track. We generally had months, even years, to sort of figure stuff out. We were working in functional teams, of analysts and testers, developers, all sort of doing our own estimation with our own milestones. So it was kind of a bit easier as well from that respect. And it was very clear who was steering the project. There was a project manager, and they were responsible for steering the project in the right direction. So yes, we did have some potential to shoot ourselves in the foot, but I would argue it's way higher now. Now we're in cross-functional teams, so we're all having to sort of estimate together, even though we all do different things and have different specialities. We don't have any time for correcting course because it's just constant, rapid change, always something new and shinier to deliver. Sometimes our objectives are very unclear when we're working in an agile way. We don't really know what our milestones are. Again, in the traditional, for all the sort of bagging that the traditional approach gets, it was very clear what our milestones were. Now it's not so clear. There's lots of change, and we're constantly prioritizing stuff. So high potential to shoot ourselves in the foot. And this is why all of you put your hands up and said that you shoot yourselves in the foot. So how do we actually marry this up and reduce the chances we're going to shoot ourselves in the foot? The likelihood is we're always going to shoot ourselves in the foot with estimation, but at least let's do some of these things better so that we can sort of restrict the impact of that. So this is a phrase from the Scrum Guide. Scrum employs an iterative incremental approach to optimize predictability and control risk, which is, I think, it's a very interesting statement, given what we've just been talking about, that in Agile, we've got lots of change and we're constantly prioritizing and adapting and responding. And Scrum's talking about optimizing predictability, which seems kind of paradoxical. But actually, what's happening is that Scrum's talking about a different type of predictability. And this is really going to be the thrust of my talk, is actually using that kind of predictability to not shoot ourselves in the foot. Because it's interesting, Agile is often thought of as a kind of fly by the seat of your pants approach, not a predictable approach. But actually, like I said, if we actually, there are certain things that we can do to improve the sort of stability of our environment that are going to enable us to give some predictability. So obviously now we're incorporating feedback as we go. We're delivering in short bursts. We're incorporating feedback. Does that make us unpredictable? We don't know exactly what we're doing in sequence. We're always going to give ourselves the opportunity to reprioritize. Does that make us unpredictable? Like, just by the very nature of doing those things. We're welcoming change. We're making it easy for change to happen, and then incorporating it. So just by its very nature, do those things make us unpredictable? I would argue no, if we look at predictability in a different way. And I think this is what we need to do if we want to marry up agile approaches with what business needs in terms of predictability. And the way I would describe it is the difference between what I call deterministic predictability and empirical predictability. Okay? So deterministic predictability is kind of what we've been doing up until now, the sort of more traditional approach. So we determine how long it will take to do what we need to do. Oops, sorry. We determine how long it will take to do what we need to do. We then put the answer into a plan. And then as we go along, we keep asking ourselves how long is left to deliver the plan. And then we stick to the plan. So we're being driven by the plan. So the predictability, you could argue it's faux predictability, but the predictability the business is getting is we have a plan, we know when we've said we're going to deliver stuff, these are our milestones, so therefore as long as we're sort of monitoring and tracking against that and sticking to it, then that we're being predictable. In empirical predictability, instead we understand how long we have to do what we need to do. So we want to understand our constraints in terms of time and budget. We create or update the plan that we have. We then monitor progress through working software, so delivering working software in very short bursts, and other metrics that help us determine progress towards the objectives, customer metrics. We make observations about where we're at, what the product looks like, what the situation is with our teams in the organization, in the market. And then we go back in a loop. And then, so we monitor our progress, make observations, and then say, what do we need to do now? And then we go back and we say, okay, how long do we have to do what we need to do? We update our plan. So it's more of it's more based on observation rather than predictions, okay? So this is a key difference between empiricism and determinism. So that leads us on to the number one thing you do to not shoot yourself in the foot is become predictably good at delivering. So the first few of these are actually not really about estimating at all. They're actually about reducing the what I'd call the reducible uncertainty that we have, okay? There are things that we can do that are generally uncertain in our environment, so we can actually make more certain. So I kind of liken this to, does anyone recognize this? What is that? Yes, Shinkansen, the bullet train, Japanese bullet train. I kind of liken the kind of predictability we're going for the bullet train, or maybe the London Underground, where every 2 or 3 minutes, the train is going to come, okay? So we don't need to predict when the train's going to come, estimate when the train's going to come. We can show up and the train will come. If we miss a train, it will come again in the next 2 minutes. So we've got predictable delivery of trains. And it's also really, really fast and reliable and awesome, right? So, and this is kind of what we're trying to do in our environments when we work in an agile way, is that we actually try and build a network for high-speed trains rather than make trains faster, okay? So we become predictable by delivering frequently, early and often. And because we're working from the top of an ordered backlog, because we're always working highest value first, that's also very predictable. Because we're continuously delivering, we're always looking at the highest value things. So if something doesn't get delivered, we know it's going to be coming soon. If it's up near the top of the backlog, it's going to be coming soon. So if we're actually delivering and then sharing our progress with everyone concerned with the project, we're all adjusting our expectations together about what's being delivered and when and what's coming up. So that's a really, really good thing to do to create a more predictable environment, is to actually get everyone together, deliver, show them what you've delivered, update the expectations. Everyone goes away knowing exactly what we're doing next, and you move on. And also just simple things like knowing when we do planning, when we do this reviewing, when do we release. So rather than asking ourselves, when is the next time we're releasing, we can actually say, this is when we release, and what goes into the release is still uncertain, but at least we're creating certainty about what we're releasing. So those are kind of things that we can do that just create a more certain environment and more predictability. The question of when am I going to get that feature kind of becomes moot, at least, well, at the feature level it becomes moot because we are constantly delivering, reviewing, planning the next increment, et cetera, et cetera. We're all doing it together. We're steering together. We're collaborating together. So that leads on to the number 2, where you don't shoot yourself in the foot. Again, not really about estimation per se, but being transparent. So sharing your process and your progress, okay? So being transparent makes us more predictable. If something isn't visible or not called out, it means we've missed it. It doesn't mean it means we're not hiding something, it means we've missed it. So if we're in a transparent environment and something's missing, we call it out, and we say, oh yes, we forgot that, and we can add it in, okay? And that updates everyone. When we're not in a transparent environment, when things are missing, it's usually because someone's hiding something. Because we're not in we're in a culture of lack of trust. So we don't have transparency by default. It's something you have to work at and create. So this is why we do things like sprint reviews, right? Is that we want to try and create transparency. It's why we put our work on the walls and make it visible, because we want to create transparency. So sharing what we're currently working on, why we're working on that thing, why that thing's the most valuable, creates predictability. Having shared artifacts. So the working product, the working software is the primary measure of progress in agile software delivery, but we can also use other artifacts. Our product backlog should be a shared artifact that we're creating transparency of. Everyone should see what's next on the product backlog, and we should talk about it and actually collaborate on what should be next to deliver. The sprint backlog in a current sprint or a current iteration, what the team's working on, their progress towards that, make that transparent. Okay, that improves predictability. And like I mentioned, customer metrics, success metrics, understanding our progress towards those creates predictability as well. So transparency is absolutely huge. It's such a necessary part of working in an environment of creating predictability. You need to have transparency. So this is empirical predictability. This is why Scrum sort of bangs on about empiricism in the Scrum guide. We want to deliver that working product every 2 weeks or so, preferably even earlier than that, but at least we want to do it in very, very small, quick, frequent loops. We want to collaborate together, review where we're at. I'm using the word customers in the loosest sense, including stakeholders, users, etc. But we want to collaborate together, look at where we're at, look at the product, look at our artifacts, let's see where we're at and decide what we need to do next. That's empiricism. That's the difference. In a predictive environment, we try and predict what's going to happen, and we sort of stick to a plan. In an empirical environment, we say, this is where we're at, and this is what we're going to do next. So coming together and doing this kind of review is much better than status reporting. Status reporting doesn't create transparency. Transparency is created by coming together, reviewing progress, and deciding what to do next. And we can call out our risks and impediments, and we can actually call out what we're going to do to mitigate them. We can test our assumptions, and we can look at our dependencies, and we can manage and reduce our dependencies. So you see, we haven't even spoken about estimation yet, and all of these things are actually the most important ways that you're going to create better predictability and not shoot yourself in the foot when you're estimating stuff. But these things are, these basic parts of, I suppose, the sort of agile approach are often missed. We're trying to work in agile ways, but we're not creating this transparency. And we're not delivering predictably, and we're not reviewing our progress together. Okay, now we're going to start talking about estimation. So we've done all the good bits. We've created a more predictable environment. We've done everything we can to reduce the reducible uncertainty. But we're still going to be asked, when am I going to get that feature? When are we going to be done? Et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so number third way to not shoot yourself in the foot is find out what type of estimate you actually are being asked for. Okay. Very often we just go in to an estimation session and just to provide an estimate. We don't really know what we're actually estimating. We just get a bunch of work and then just put some story points on it and out we come. But we don't really know what the point of the request is and what question we're answering. There's actually loads of different types of estimates. Here's just a few. You know, what are we going to get and when? There's a classic. Which is quicker or smaller, A or B? Okay, so maybe I want to do an ROI comparison. So I want to see which one is smaller effort. When are we going to get X? So X representing a feature, so a particular feature. How much will be done by Y? How many features will we get done by this date? Will X or will everything be done by this date? Can we deliver X or everything for the time money available? And you know, this last one again, which I mentioned earlier, are you guys actually, you know, have you got a plan? Do you know what you're doing? Do you have a strategy for delivering the objective? Are you going to deliver maximum bang for buck? Okay. The business just wants to know that we have a plan and we know what we're doing. And so having a strategy and a plan for delivering the objective is often what is actually being asked for. And we tend to default to just giving kind of, you know, times and dates and story points when actually the business wants to know what is your strategy for delivering the objective. So what are we actually estimating? We need to know what that is. And obviously, you know, they're sort of more general questions, and then, you know, different departments are going to have different needs and more, you know, different sort of needs in terms of predictability. You know, sales, you know, they want to know what features they can sell to potential clients or to existing clients. Marketing want to know, you know, when can we start our campaign? You know, what features can we talk about at the next roadshow, etc. Project and program managers, you know, when will Jane become available for other projects? You know, Jane is a shared UX person. She's going to be needed for other projects. When's she going to be available? Or when will this team become available? When will we need Jane? So these are all just examples of different kinds of questions that different departments and different people are going to have. We need to know what kind of question we're answering and what the intent behind the request is. If we don't know that, there's a high risk we're going to give the wrong kind of estimate, and it isn't going to make sense, and it's not actually going to provide information. The whole point of doing an estimate is that it provides information that people can use to make decisions with. So that's really, really important. Okay, so this is a classic. The precision that we give in our estimations. So incorporating appropriate levels of uncertainty is absolutely crucial to not shooting yourself in the foot. So what do I mean by that? So first of all, calling out risks, assumptions, issues, dependencies. So when we're making a prediction about how long something's going to take or when something's going to happen, there are a bunch of assumptions that we're making underneath that. So we need to be explicit about what those things are. You know, how stable is our team? Are we going to be losing any members, gaining any members anytime soon? Are all our team members 100% committed to the project? You know, often we have, you know, teams that are actually, you know, certain members of the teams actually have 3 or 4 different projects on the go. Okay, so that's gonna inhibit our ability to predict very easily. How predictable are we as a team in terms of our throughput or velocity of planned work? So when we talk about velocity and throughput, we're talking about the work that we're actually planning. So someone has prioritized some stuff for us, the product owner, for example, and we've planned what work we're going to deliver in that sprint. It's the delivery of that planned work is useful as a throughput measure for the business. Okay, but what about unplanned work? Do we get to spend all of our time on planned work, or do we actually end up having people walking up to us and saying, "Oh, can you just do that for me?" Or do we have like other pipelines of work that we have to try and figure out and juggle? And if we do have unplanned work, is there a predictable level of unplanned work? You know, do we know that we spend 20% of our capacity on unplanned work, or does it vary? Some sprints we get to focus all of our time on planned work, and other sprints we're just consumed with unplanned work. Okay, so we need to understand that in order to give a credible estimate. What about, you know, dependencies? You know, we might have technical dependencies, schedule dependencies on other teams, other people. All of these things can trip us up if we don't incorporate them and call them out explicitly when we're making our estimates. So when someone's asking and saying, when am I going to get this thing? And we're giving these sort of shades of grey and calling these things out, and they sort of push back on that. You know, we have to be sort of stick to our guns with this. is that an estimate isn't just a time or a date or a bunch of scope. It also is calling out what assumptions you're making to give that estimate. So this is really, really important. Never ever give a precise date of when a set of scope will be delivered. Okay, don't say, oh yeah, we'll have all of that done on June the 14th. All right, it's kind of like a due date for a pregnancy. It's not actually the baby's not going to come on the due date. It's just a good enough sort of time range that we kind of have an expectation of roughly when things are going to happen. So don't give a precise date. Let's give shades of grey. Use confidence levels and shades of grey. And similarly, don't say that a precise set of scope will be delivered on a given date. Don't say oh, on June the 5th we'll deliver feature A, B, C, D, E, and F. Okay? You're almost guaranteed to be shooting yourself in the foot if you do that and end up in a death march to try and live up to your commitments, and then you realise that you've made a terrible mistake and you've unravelled all this complexity and things change, and then you get blamed for this. Why didn't you meet your promise? Why are your estimates so bad? Okay, why do we suck at estimating? Okay, this is a wicked problem. This is not every single business that I work with has this problem, that they suck at estimation, yet we continue to ask for estimates and don't incorporate all of the stuff that we're talking about here. So we've got to have a conversation with the people asking for estimates and start talking about uncertainty and incorporating it into our estimates. In a healthy environment, the purpose of an estimate is to actually help guide and steer decisions to enable meeting the objective within our constraints. Okay, that's what the purpose of an estimate in a healthy environment. It's not about setting an expectation of an exact event happening, which is what we tend to do. There's a whole gamut of possibilities of the way the future could pan out from this moment when we give an estimate. We have to talk about all of those possible gamuts of how things can pan out. Don't just pick one and say this is how the world's going to pan out. It's guaranteed to be to shoot yourself in the foot. Precision is the enemy of being right. Okay, if you want to be right, don't be precise. We do this. We actually do this really well in our daily lives. If I'm meeting someone for a drink, if I say to them, I will be there at 8 o'clock, okay, and I show up at 8:30, they're going to be a bit annoyed with me because I said I was going to be there at 8 o'clock. I didn't meet my promise, okay? If I say, oh, I'll be there sometime after 8:30, something like that, okay? And then I show up at 8:20, they'll be delighted, right? Because I've actually earlier than expected. Or if I show up at 8:30, I've met my expectation, okay? So this is about being accurate, not precise, okay? We don't want to give false levels of precision when it's not appropriate, because the expectation level comes with that. Being precise gives an expectation that that is what's going to happen. That's the way the world's going to pan out. So we've got to incorporate uncertainty. We've got to give ourselves wiggle room. So this is an important one as well. So often companies that say they struggle with forecasting and don't know when things are going to happen and are unpredictable, they actually don't do any prioritization. Okay. Now, if we don't prioritize, how are we supposed to know when a particular work item is going to be done if we don't actually prioritize where that thing sits in the queue of work? Okay. So we've actually got to know, we've got to have some kind of understanding of when we're actually going to start that piece of work. Now, if you've actually prioritized and you've got an ordered backlog and you see that piece of work is kind of number 4 in the backlog, then if things don't change, then you kind of have a rough idea of when you're going to start that work and therefore when you're actually going to deliver it. If you're not actually prioritizing at all, or if you're continually changing priorities, then you've got no chance of answering that question. Okay, so the order or sequence of work is really important. So that's the prioritization part. But we've also got to take into account, again, the fact that we're trying to be agile, we're trying to be responsive and actually incorporate feedback and work on the highest value things. So we actually have to have the conversation with the requester of the estimate to say that if you're asking us to make estimates beyond sort of a few sprints, that's actually inhibiting our agility, because we're kind of giving you an estimate for okay, well, if we line up all the work in this order, we can split it over several sprints. And if we kind of stick to that order, then, we're kind of giving you some level of predictability about when, the particular feature you care about is going to happen. But that's inhibiting agility. That's restricting our ability to have a review and then say, well, actually, we're going to do this thing instead, and we're going to move it up the queue. As soon as we make the change, then we have to update the expectation along with it. But we tend to not do that. We leave the initial expectation that we set with the person who asked for the estimate. So we've got to have a conversation about agility. Remember, we're in a different paradigm. Okay, now that we're doing agile software development, and if businesses want to actually get the benefits of agile software development, we've got to have the conversation with the business people to say, do you want us to work in an agile way or not? Because if we work in an agile way, our focus is going to be 100% on how we deliver more value. It's not going to be on why didn't we deliver what we planned. Okay, so we have to have the conversation about it. Do you want us to be responsive and constantly prioritized by value, or do you want to have some sort of more certainty about the order we're going to do things and the schedule we're going to do things in? Okay, it's a good thing that we're welcoming change. And so often I see agile teams who are petrified of things changing, which is kind of ironic, right? We're supposed to be welcoming change for the customer as a competitive advantage, and we get frightened of welcoming change because we're still in this kind of paradigm of being asked to give accurate and precise predictions about when things are going to happen. So we've got to have the conversation and don't sweep it under the carpet, okay? Number 6, how to not shoot yourself in the foot, is when we're estimating, remember we're estimating options for solving problems, not specific solutions, okay? If the business wants us to actually estimate specific solutions up front that we're going to deliver for something, in a few weeks or a few months' time, again, that means that we actually have to go away and actually design the solution for the thing that we're going to build up front so that we can provide a credible estimate for it. Because we actually need to decide, well, if there are 3 different ways of doing this, which one are we going to do? And the one that we're going to, depending on what we choose, our estimate's going to be different. So if you want us to give you an estimate for a solution, we've got to do it up front, okay? Which again inhibits agility. So we've got to have that conversation. We can do it, but if we just give an estimate and don't actually have this conversation about what we're doing, again we're going to end up giving a shonky answer. So when we're doing iterative incremental development, what we often forget is that we're actually controlling time. So, this is what Scrum Guy is talking about when he's talking about optimizing predictability. We're actually controlling time rather than predicting it, okay? So we're saying we're going to spend 2 weeks to try and achieve this goal. And in order to achieve this goal, there are 3 or 4 different ways we can achieve it, and we're going to choose which option we think is the right way to achieve it. And we're going to pick the minimum effort thing to do first because we're in an iterative environment. So we're going to do what the minimum thing it takes to deliver the goal, and then we're going to iterate on it. Okay. So because of that, we actually want to talk about options rather than just picking a solution and estimating that solution. So if the goal is that we want to be able to contact dormant customers by email, for example. One solution could be to build a fully automated customer email system integrated with MailChimp, right? Another solution could be just to send a manual email with no integration whatsoever. Now, solution 2 might be absolutely enough for us to, as a first increment, to actually get determined feature viability, okay? Solution 1, we reckon, will take 6 to 8 weeks. Solution 2 will take 2 to 3 days, okay? So we've got to have the conversation. When we're asked to estimate this piece of work, the problem, we need to be able to say, okay, well, there's 2 or 3 different options here. If we choose option 1, there's going to be some schedule risk because this is going to take a bit of time. If we do option 2, we can do it nice and quickly. We can actually get something out to customers in a few days, okay? So we're controlling time to see how this is the difference between empiricism and being predictive. Is that we're actually saying, are we going to spend 6 to 8 weeks on this, or are we going to spend 2 to 3 days on it? Okay, and we choose. We get to choose that. So we've got to think about that when we're being asked to estimate stuff. Is that if we've got 6 months to deliver an outcome, we're in control of that. We say, right, what are we going to do? What is the best way of using that 6 months to achieve the outcome? And then what we do is we then break that down into much smaller increments and constraints. So we say, okay, in 2 weeks, what are we going to do to deliver that outcome? And then in the next 2 weeks, what are we going to do to deliver that outcome? Right? It's a different paradigm. So estimate options, not upfront solutions. If we do upfront solutions, we've got to build the solution up front, which then loses the ability to be agile. And of course, we've got to revisit these estimates regularly and frequently. So we've got to monitor progress towards the goal under which the estimate is, the goal that the estimate is for. We've got to monitor our progress towards that, okay? And we've got to revisit it, okay? As things change, again, we're being empirical. We're looking at how are things, where are we at with the product and with the customer metrics? How have things changed in the market, in our internal team, in our broader company? And what are we going to do about that? What's the right thing to do next based on the reality of what's happened? Okay? We've got to identify which assumptions, remember we've called out our assumptions and our estimates. Maybe we've actually now validated some of those assumptions and they're not assumptions anymore. That's great. Or maybe we've uncovered some more assumptions, or maybe we've invalidated some of our assumptions and we've actually gone, you know what? Our initial estimate was based on this assumption and it's invalid, okay? We need to be talking about these things. We can't just keep the original estimate and try and stick to it. So we've got to revisit it. There was a talk prior to this, unfortunately I didn't attend, which I would have loved to, about metrics for delivering in a sort of agile environment. Unfortunately, I was sort of doing last-minute preparations for my own talk. But this is a really, really important one as well. So when we're asked to estimate something, we tend to estimate the effort involved in delivering that thing. Okay. But unfortunately, in the environments that we're in, the effort it takes us to deliver something is only a small percentage of the actual time it takes for that thing to be delivered, the elapsed time, okay? So we actually need to look at cycle times, not effort, when we're being asked about how long is something going to take, okay? If we're being asked to compare two things, like compare A and B, which one is smaller effort, okay, then we don't need to use cycle times, because we're just comparing, we're saying which one is smaller. Okay, we can use relative sizing for it. But if we're being asked how long something is going to take, we've got to use cycle times. This basically brings up the topic of what we call flow efficiency versus resource efficiency. Okay, so the amount of effort, or so the amount of time you spend actually working on something compared to the amount of time it actually takes is called your flow efficiency. Okay. Now, typically, this is very, very low, as I've said, okay, which makes it very, very unpredictable in our environment to actually know how long something's going to take. So understand your flow efficiency. Understand where all the delays are in when you're doing a piece of work, measuring cycle time and finding out where things are actually waiting and in queues will, again, help you be more predictable. So when we say it will take 6 weeks, and we're making an effort estimate, the likelihood is to deliver that outcome with high quality, even if it actually takes you 6 weeks of work to do it, will probably be way, way longer than that to actually, for the work to be delivered. And of course, the person asking for it isn't going to be specifying that. They're just going to be thinking about calendar time. They're not going to be thinking about cycle times and efforts. They're going to be making an assumption that they start the work now, and then it's going to take however long they said it's going to take, and then they're going to give it to me. So that kind of leads on to that we need to use data when we're making forecasts and estimation in order that we can actually make better estimates. So yesterday's weather. So because we're in complex environments, trying to predict what's going to happen is very, very, very tricky. When you come into work on a Monday morning and you try and predict, I challenge you to try and predict what's going to happen that day, let alone that week, and see how right you are, okay? There are so many things going on in our environment. It's not just about changing requirements. It's about changing landscape around us, internally and externally. Okay, so we have to understand that we're in a complex environment. So, again, Scrum calls this out and says that's why we use empirical process. Teams estimate items on the backlog, but they don't forecast multiple sprints in advance. Okay, we use data and empiricism to make forecasts if we have to. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about now is this kind of, if we do need to provide forecasts about what features we might get on a particular date, we can do that using yesterday's weather, not rather than using gut feel predictions, which are prone to huge error because of all the things we talked about. So if we imagine that this here is kind of an inverted backlog, if you like. So, whoa, oh my goodness, that went horribly wrong. All right, I'm going to stop using the laser thing. I'm just not competent with it. Okay, so let's imagine that this is like an inverted backlog. And so the things in green are the things we've delivered, and the rest of the things are the things we think we need to do next. So as we deliver these things, we can actually sort of plot these things on a kind of burn-up chart, if you like. So so we've got time running along the bottom, and we've got our sort of scope along the top. Now, what we can do here is, because so our delivery rate, so our throughput of valuable items from this backlog, is obviously going to vary. Okay, it's going to vary for a few reasons. It's going to vary because we're doing software development, not building widgets. Okay, so the individual work items are going to vary in size because we're building software. Okay, so sometimes things will take longer than we think they will, and sometimes things will be quicker than we think they're going to be. Okay, so when we count our delivery rate or velocity, if you like, and we say, okay, sprint 1 we delivered 6 stories, sprint 2 we delivered 8 stories, sprint 3 we delivered 4 stories, sprint 4 we delivered 9 stories. There's obviously a variance in there. Okay. So we need to capture that variance if we're going to make predictions, because we can't tell how things are going to pan out in the following sprints. Okay, so we've got to actually incorporate variance and uncertainty into what might happen in our velocity going forward. Okay, so this is what these lines are for. These dotted lines are for. So we've got our sort of delivery rate. We can now sort of just draw a sort of optimistic and a pessimistic line coming out of this. Okay, so if everything goes really, really, really well, our line will sort of, go upwards into this kind of realm. If things don't go very well, it's going to stay sort of more flatter, and it's going to be more in this kind of realm. Okay, so bearing in mind that this is time and this is scope, when we're asked one of these estimation questions, we can now give an answer based on a forecast using our delivery data. Okay, so let's say release 1 is we think currently this is the scope that we need to deliver release 1, and we are we're planning to release release 1 on May the 30th. Okay, so what we can do is draw a line up from May the 30th for our time, and we draw a scope line across release 1, and we say, okay, based on the forecast range of delivery rate, where are we going to land? So we draw the two lines, and where they intersect is our probabilistic forecast of where we're going to land. Okay, so in this case, we're actually pretty confident that we're on track. Okay, because remember, this line here is actually a pessimistic view of the world. So what we're kind of saying is, even if things go a little bit crappy, we're still on track for the amount of scope we're trying to deliver and the date we're trying to deliver it in. So we've actually got pretty high confidence. But remember, this is a big shade of grey. And the further out we're trying to predict, the more uncertain it is. So we should be using terms like, we're pretty confident right now that we're going to, these are the things we're going to deliver for this release 1. Okay? But we're not saying, yes, we promise we will get these features on release 1. And what we're not going to do is just draw a nice, neat line, which I see in most people's burn-up charts, just a single line, which just comes up, and we just use that single line as what the future is going to pan out. This represents the fact that there are multiple ways the future can pan out. Okay, so that's what we want to do. So milestone falls in our pessimistic forecast range, so we have fairly high confidence. That's great. What if we add some scope to release 1? Okay, well now, look, we're still on track. We're still within our cone, but our confidence has gone down now. Okay, things have to now go pretty well for our forecast, for us to be able to deliver that amount of scope in that time frame. Okay, so this is where we need to steer. Okay, this is where we need a product owner to actually say, do we really need all of that scope for release 1? How maybe we can simplify, maybe we can take some of that scope out. Okay. What if we bring forward the date as well? Or sorry, we go back to the original scope, bring forward the date. Same kind of thing happens. We're still on track, but our confidence has gone down. Okay, so again, we need steering. What if we add more scope and keep that time the same? Now we've actually pushed ourselves way out of our on-track zone. So we need to say, look, we're not going to be able to deliver that outcome. And to be honest with you, again, there's an opportunity to discuss why have we got so many things in our first release? Why are we doing such a big batch of release? Remember, we're trying to be empirical and deliver value faster to the customer. So we should be doing much smaller batches of work. Okay. So this is an opportunity to have a discussion about why are we even having to predict all of these items in the release. Okay, but at least it enables you to have a conversation about uncertainty and sort of where we think we're going to land, and then we can actually push that thing down by reducing scope, or you could technically push out time. But why is it a bad idea to push out time rather than reduce scope? Anyone? There's two reasons why it's a bad idea. Anyone? Oh. Yes? Okay, maybe 3 reasons then. So the first reason is it costs more money. Okay, the longer we spend developing something, the higher the development cost. Okay, so that's, we don't really want to do that. We want to try and keep things as low cost as possible. The second reason, though, is that you can't turn back time. Right? So if we actually reduce scope and keep time where it is, we still have the option of adding more time afterwards if we need to. But if we shift time out and set the expectations of the release and push that out, we can't turn back time. Okay, so it's always better to manage scope and use scope as your lever before you actually push out releases. So this is why we actually want to be. It's much better to actually have, a scaled agile framework called release trains, but we want to have predictable release schedules or cadences for this very reason. Okay, that we're controlling the cost. We're keeping our batches small, and we're actually delivering and giving ourselves the option of pushing out time if we need to, and doing more and iterating, etc., etc. So something like this as a discussion point with the people who are asking for estimates is a great kind of mechanism for doing that. So if you do all of those things, you've greatly reduced your chances of shooting yourselves in the foot. So in summary, become empirically predictable. So it's not about making better predictions. We need to become empirically predictable. So get good at delivering and know when you plan and review and release. So actually having a cadence of planning and reviewing and releasing is actually really good because everyone knows when you do those things. So it's pretty predictable. Be transparent with everything. So share your process, how you work, and your progress towards your goals. What are we working on and why? Where are we at with that? Know what type of estimate you need. Incorporate uncertainty into your predictions. Give shades of grey confidence levels. Account for the fact that there might be poor or no prioritization. So again, have a conversation, say, hey, we have no idea at the moment what the priorities are, so it's really difficult to give a prediction about when feature X will be delivered. So could you maybe tell us what the priority is between that and something else, right? And agility. Let's not shy away from the conversation and just go, oh, the business doesn't get agile. We'll just do agile ourselves and we won't have a conversation with the business about it. Let's actually have a conversation about what is our strategy for achieving the objective and actually figure out how to actually better account for that and be predictable. Estimate problems and options, not specific solutions. Revisit those estimates regularly, frequently. Use cycle time, not effort, because people want to know when things are going to happen generally, so that's actually elapsed time. And use data, don't use gut feel predictions, because we all know developers are crap at estimating anyway, even if everything was kind of predictable in the environment. And there's a reason developers are crap at estimating, it's because software is unpredictable. It's an unpredictable pursuit. So it's actually never going to go away. So, but there are things we can do to create more predictability in our environment. Thank you.